Scary Stories. When I was a sophomore in college, I lived in a small but beautiful historic studio apartment in a small East Coast city that had somewhat of a reputation for crime and danger. However, the neighborhood I lived in was actually considered one of the good neighborhoods. It was close to the city's university and was mostly students living there, especially on the street my building was on. My building was a huge 4-story townhouse, if you can really call it that. It was really a mansion as a whole, built in 1895. The architecture was really awesome. Built-in bookshelves and huge mahogany pocket doors that slid into the walls. Anyway, the building wasn't exactly in mint condition, and my landlord was pretty lazy. He would always come by and check up on things, and would make promises to get stuff fixed, but never really got around to doing much of anything. The apartment I was renting was on the first floor, my front door immediately on the left as you walked in the building's door to the street. This door, the building's front door, which from the street opened to a small lobby area with only one door in it, mine, and a staircase to the other apartments upstairs, was huge and heavy and was never locked. In fact, you couldn't even lock it, and it didn't even close all the way, so basically the door to the apartment was open to the street. I asked my landlord countless times to please do something about the front door, but he never did anything. Well, one night I was getting home from work, and it was very late, about 3:45 a.m., and I was just sitting on my couch watching a little TV before I went to bed. I had also gotten totally stripped down, something I truly loved being able to do considering I lived alone. Anyway, not even 10 minutes since I had gotten home and sat down, I hear 3 slow knocks at my door. I'm thinking, who would be at my door at this hour? What could they possibly want? Why didn't I hear the building front door open like I normally do? Young and naive, I was half scared and half intrigued. I put on a robe and slowly crept towards the door, which by the way was literally right next to the couch where I was sitting. At this point my door did not have a peephole, so I just had to kind of take a leap of faith and open the door. When I did, a tall middle-aged man stood staring down at me with low eyes and a grin. He was wearing all black, many layers, and a big black trench coat. The first thing that he said was, "Can I come in?" With the door barely open, I got a deep pit in my stomach and just went, no man, what's up? He just stared into my eyes for a second, clearly disappointed, and then said, "I see you around," and started to grin again. The pit in my stomach had evolved into a churning sensation, and I was starting to get nauseous. "I've been watching you, and I like the way you look. So, are you gay or bi?" I was just like, "I don't know, but it's late and I'm going to bed. Bye." He kinda nodded and lingered for a second, as did I, watching to make sure I saw him leave the building. Once he did, I closed the door, locked it, and stood with my hand still on the knob for a good minute at least. After I snapped out of my shock, I ran over to my couch and pushed it against the door. I ended up sleeping on the couch that night, even though it was right there. It just made me feel safer, like I could hear if something happened. Well, nothing happened that night. It wasn't until about a week later, on one of my nights off from work, that I was sitting around my apartment, winding down by myself after I had some friends over drinking and smoking a little bit, as college kids would do. All of a sudden, I hear a weird rattling noise coming from across the room, so I turn off the music I was playing to find out that it was coming from none other than my front doorknob. I looked at it for a second and saw that both the knob and the top lock were jiggling. Someone was trying to get in, like a deer in the headlights. I was just frozen staring at the things wiggling and shake until I started to see the top lock actually bulge and start to turn. I leapt up from my chair and soared to the door, grabbing tightly on the lock and forcefully twisting it back to being locked. The jiggling of the lock and knob stopped for a second because whoever it was clearly knew now that I knew. It was only a second though before they just started struggling again and had to use all my might to keep it still. Sweat was dripping down my forehead and my rib cage, and after about 15 seconds of wrestling with this intruder, it suddenly stopped, and I heard the building door open and close and footsteps run down the stairs of the stoop to the sidewalk. Just like I was before, I was paralyzed with my hands at the door for a good while before I realized I was crying and shaking and that I needed to call someone. My instinct was to call the police. In hindsight, I regret this for the following reasons. I was having basically a panic attack while I was on the phone with 911 and actually threw up during the call, and I think that's when they decided I was just messed up or something. When the two police got to my apartment, they stood in my doorway as I struggled to recount to them what had happened. As I'm shaking and crying, I noticed one point that they're both smirking and laughing, and I say, "What's so funny right now?" One of them goes, "It reeks of marijuana." I was just like, okay, and basically argued with them after that. Long story short, they ended up confiscating a bunch of shit from my apartment and basically turning the whole situation into a little mini drug bust. Although they said they weren't gonna charge me with anything, just took my shit. Nothing about this attempted break-in besides keep your doors locked. I was devastated and felt so helpless. The same scenario happened one more time about 2 weeks from the last time. Only instead of calling the police, I called my dad, who raced down in an hour with a crowbar up his sleeve. Unfortunately, by the time he had gotten there, whoever it was had already left. My dad ended up cussing out my landlord and demanding that he get the door fixed and install a new lock and a peephole on my door. He did make this happen within a reasonable amount of time, and I also got one of those bars you wedge between the doorknob and the floor, as well as an aluminum baseball bat to protect myself with, so I felt a lot better from then on. Needless to say, though, I ended my lease for that apartment a month early and never moved back to that street. I never found out for sure who was trying to pick my locks, and if it was the guy who had come to my door the first time, but whoever it was, let's not meet again. It all started over a year ago. Living in my current small neighborhood, it was unusually hot in our house for October, and my sister figured it'd be a good idea to keep her window open for a bit of air. She was doing her homework and I was getting ready for bed when suddenly she burst into my room. She frantically says that she heard some noises outside. The sound of leaves crunching under a person's steps. I believed it to be an animal, so I walked into her room and stayed there for not more than 5 minutes until I hear leaves crunching. We quickly glance out the window, only to hear the sound of something running away in the woods. But that wouldn't be the end of the story. During the winter, I enjoyed exploring the woods towards the back of my house, climbing trees and traveling further back into the fields. I remember the events very clearly. It had just snowed that night, first snowfall of winter, and I was more than excited to head out there. I did so and climbed to my usual tree to look out. I gave a cursory glance around me and at the ground when I noticed something strange, footsteps leading away from my house. This wouldn't be weird as long as the front steps didn't end pointing straight at my house, and the origin of them came from a seemingly long off start. I tracked them down to a point where there was a rusty wire fence covered in snow where they disappeared. October 2017, it started up again. I was laying in my bed, pitch dark, not a light shining through my room, when I heard it, my doorknob turning and my door creaking open. My heart stopped. Every single possibility of what it was rushing through my mind. Since I was covered by my blanket, I quickly shot my sister a text. "Did you just come in my room?" She replied with a sharp,
"Nah, bro, I'm all the way in Hillard."
My heart began pumping fast. I slowly snuck my hand under my pillow and grabbed my baton, sent a text to my dad and waited. My dad came in mere minutes later with a knife, shot the lights on, and I jumped out of bed. Searched the entire house with nothing. Alarm set, all doors locked. Impossible. There's no way that happened otherwise. My dad and my mom were asleep, and a cat would have opened it much faster if it had jumped at the doorknob. You best believe I did not sleep a second that night. Fast forward to December. My relatives are in town staying for a week in the basement. We turned on the alarm and all head to sleep. I stayed up gaming. In the morning, around 2:30, 3 o'clock, my uncle slowly opened his eyes. With a feeling of being watched, his eyes adjusted a bit to the dark before he saw it. A guy, average height, scrawny, hair flowing in the wind, and shivering, looking inside their room through the window. My uncle screamed. They grabbed the baby before taking off upstairs. That morning, I was informed what happened. I looked for footsteps, saw only the smallest sign of a footprint, a front toe print made by what could only assume to be a sneaker. My uncle gave me more details without telling me I looked for footprints. He said the guy was leaning to the left, looking in. The footprint matched the story. The left had a thin line of dirt. Anyone could have shimmied across. Now that leads to tonight, the night I could swear he or whatever it was had been in my house. I couldn't sleep. Life has been stressful lately, and I was up pretty much all night until I tried getting rest. Every night, I've had Christmas lights dimly light the room until tonight. I figured the lights must have been interfering with my sleep, so I unplugged them and headed off to sleep. Pillow over my head, I started to drift off until it happened. A quick strum of my guitar and the sound of something falling over, with a desperate attempt to stop it from hitting the ground, filled the room. The sound ignited my heart rate. Saliva developing at extreme speed made it hard not to swallow. I could feel the presence of someone in my room. Realizing I left my baton on my desk, I did the next logical thing: pretend I was asleep. I tried and laid there for what felt like hours, when in reality only a few minutes, until I heard a whimper come from my sister's room. Imagining this may be the day everyone in my family was secretly murdered. But me, I gathered all the courage I had. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and grabbed my baton. I busted into my sister's room and screamed, "Hey!" only to see they were unharmed. My sister asked what the hell I was doing, and just stood there, looked into the pitch black of my room, and cried. I have never in my life felt the overwhelming emotion of believing my family was going to be taken from me until today. I sit here in my chair, writing this in hopes to document my experiences and try to come to some logical conclusion. All I can come up with is that there is some guy stalking my family, perhaps sneaking into our rooms at night. If anything else happens, I'll post it to this thread. So this happened when I was 9 years old during the summer. I grew up living with my parents and younger sisters, and our house was situated on a cul-de-sac. At the end of our cul-de-sac, there were a row of hedges with an opening at either end that led out to a huge field that had a tennis court, a playground, and a long pathway. This is relevant for later. Everybody that lived on our cul-de-sac knew each other pretty well. There were also a few kids my age, so I spent most of my free time playing outside on the grass with them. It's also worth noting that it was absolutely forbidden for any of us to venture out beyond the hedges without an adult, because our parents would not be able to see us from their houses. So one late afternoon, there were 5 of us sat on the grass chatting. It was pretty rare for someone that didn't live on the cul-de-sac to pass through, so it caught my eye when I saw a man making his way hurriedly along the pathway closest to my house. He had a scowl on his face and stared directly at us the entire time he was walking past. There was just complete silence between us until we walked through the hedge opening, and I could tell by the other kids' faces they too felt uneasy about him. We then immediately asked each other if anybody knew or had seen him before. None of us had. It was quickly forgotten about, and soon enough, each of our mothers had called us in for dinner. Around 10 minutes after we had finished dinner, I was in the kitchen helping my mom with the dishes. Our kitchen had a large window that faced out onto the grass outside, so I was taken aback when the same guy walked past again, in the same hurried manner, with the same scowl, this time staring directly into our kitchen. He had walked past. I gasped and told my mom that weird man was staring at us earlier. She looked up at him walking past, but didn't see anything until he immediately walked past in the opposite direction, again staring at us as he walked past. I yelled, "Mom!" and pointed straight at him. She saw him and ushered me out of the kitchen, saying something along the lines of, "Don't be silly. He's probably looking for someone." I went upstairs to get washed and ready for bed, the entire time feeling a bit freaked out by him. From then onward, I started spotting him at least weekly standing outside our local places, such as the post office, our local convenience store, etc. Each time I saw him, he was alone and not really ever doing much, just standing and looking around. I was always in my mom's car when I saw him, so I just ducked and kept out of his vision whenever I saw him. There were no more direct encounters, so I figured he was probably new to the area, and over time my nervousness of him lessened. Fast forward to winter. I was at school and playing on the playground during our lunch break. Towards the top end of the playground was a padlocked gate that was about 8 feet tall and about 4 feet wide. It was rarely ever used, so it caught my attention when my vision raced past the gate and I caught a shadow standing there. I did a double take, and it was the man. He was pressed right up against the gate with both hands leveled, with his head gripping the bars, staring straight at me. I freaked the hell out and started screaming and hysterically crying and made a run for it into the school building. One of the lunchtime supervisors, who also happened to live with her kids on our cul-de-sac, saw what had happened and took me straight into the nurse's office. The head teacher, along with a few other teachers, were called into the room and asked what had happened. I was too panicked to say anything outside of, "The man is out there." So the playground supervisor neighbor took over and explained to them. She said she had spotted him a few times on our cul-de-sac and had a bad feeling about him, and had told her kids not to talk to him. The teacher went to another room to look at the footage of the security camera placed on the side gate. After a while, they came back to the nurse's office and decided to call my parents and the police. The decision was made for my parents to pick me up from school early so the police can come to our house and take a statement, and because I was a hyperventilating wreck. On the car journey home, my mom told me that the teachers had said the camera footage showed him standing at the gate and then sprinting away, which they figured was because I started screaming and crying. She said it was a good thing because I scared him away, but I was bright for my age, and I knew she was saying that only to comfort me. We meet the 2 police officers at our house, 1 female officer, 1 male officer. They are very friendly and make me feel at ease. Whilst they are asking me all of the relevant questions, they then asked me to describe what he looked like. But being so young, I could only say that he was white, tall, with short brown hair. They pressed for more information, such as tattoos. The only thing that come to mind, that he looked like Dan Sullivan from EastEnders. This was met with instant laughter from both police officers and my parents, with the female officer commenting, "Wow, he must be quite good looking." As soon as she said this, my heart sank. After a while, the police had wrapped up the statement and told us to notify them to any more occurrences with this man. I was grateful for their help, but I could not help but feel like I wasn't being taken seriously by the adults. After this, I stopped seeing the guy around town, and the kids on our cul-de-sac say they don't see him either. Life goes on, and gradually, I regained the confidence to play outside again, both with friends and by myself. A year and a half later, I'm 11 years old, and it's the summertime. My parents had gone away on holiday, so my grandma and my aunt were staying at our house, looking after me and my younger sisters for the week. They were a lot more lenient than my parents and would let us play out for longer. And they even let me play over at the tennis court beyond the hedges. It was around 6 p.m. and was still light out, and I was racing my bike up and down the long path situated in the middle of the large field. I had completely worn myself out, and I was on the part of the path where it forks off near the tennis court, so I just sat on my bike for a while trying to catch my breath, while watching a group of people further down on the field playing cricket. Next thing I know, I hear somebody quietly but loud enough for me to hear it say, "Hey." I looked around, and I could not see anybody close enough that I would have been able to hear. I then hear a whistle, which leads my eyes directly over to an alleyway sandwiched between the hedgerow and the tennis court, and I recognize it to be the man from when I was younger. The sheer shock of seeing him again completely froze me up. I could not move. He steps out of the alleyway with one hand over his crotch area. He then uses the same hand to gesture me to come over, and it's then that I see the top button of his pants and his fly undone. I accept the very worst is most probably about to happen, and I instantly go into panic mode. I know that I need to get to safety ASAP, and I figured out my options. The first option is to head straight down the field to the group of people playing cricket, but I don't know these people, and I don't know if I can rely on them to keep me safe from this man. My second option is to ride my bike as fast as I can down the path past the tennis court, around the corner, and into my cul-de-sac. However, the man is in the alleyway, and if he ran through it, he would easily beat me to the hedge opening to block my way, or catch me if he wanted. I started pedaling like a madman and decided to head to my cul-de-sac. As I turn the corner, I see that he isn't at the end of the alleyway yet, so I bomb it through the hedge opening. I hear him running and saying, "Just come here." So I race down the pathway and make it to my house. The entire time I'm shouting for my grandma and aunt, and the kids playing out on the grass, figuring something is up, and ask what is wrong. I ditch my bike outside my house, go inside and lock the door, and I find my aunt in the kitchen. She's panicked and asked me what's wrong. So I explain everything as fast as I could and say we need to call the police. The next thing I know, I hear the kids outside yelling and screaming, "Go away," and calling for their parents. We look outside the kitchen window, and the man is walking past our house, looking at me dead in my eyes, completely undeterred by the commotion outside and my aunt standing next to me. He walks out of our line of vision, out of the cul-de-sac and down the road. My aunt tells me to quickly come with her in her car to follow him, so she can at least see if she can follow him to where he lives. I get in the car and sit in the passenger footwell, out of sight. After about 4 minutes of driving,
She breaks and asks, "Is that him?" I poke my head up. We are literally outside of one of my best friend's houses. He's standing at an old beaten-up telephone booth that hasn't worked all the time I've known it to be there. He's holding the phone to his ear, but it isn't saying or doing anything. To his right are three girls, a little older than I am, sat on a bench chatting away. Oblivious to the man stood silently at a public telephone that doesn't work. My aunt parks her car and says she's going to sit and watch and make sure the girls are okay, and tells me to stay down. After no longer than a minute, my aunt says these girls are getting up, so I poke my head up again, and I see them go on their way. Suddenly the man literally just drops the phone and turns around on the spot to face the girls. Before he can even take a step out of the telephone booth, my aunt starts honking her horn and opening her door to yell at him to go away and leave the girls alone. I see him completely freak out and make a break for it up an alleyway, with which has two exits. The girls turn around and try to figure out what's going on, but my aunt pulls away and was headed over to one of the alleyway exits. My aunt tells me to get her phone from her bag to call the police. We get to exit number 1, but he is nowhere to be seen, so we head to exit number 2. Meanwhile, the policewoman on the phone says she is sending for a patrol car to the area and another to our house, so we can give a statement. We get to exit number 2, and again we can't find him anywhere. We decide to head home to meet the police, where I give another statement. The police officers sent this time around take me much more seriously, and after the statement was given, they said they will also spend some time driving around the immediate area looking for the guy. From then on, I did not see the man at all, and nor did my friend. We did not ever receive any type of update from the police, so I never knew what came of the investigation. The situation ended up with me being super protective and paranoid over my younger sisters whenever they were playing outside unsupervised. And I worried that if they were caught up in the same situation, they might not have been as lucky as I am. So scary, weird guy, let's not ever meet again. For anonymous's sake, I'm going to call my friend Blanche. We met during my sophomore year of university. When we ended up taking the same French courses, we hit it off really well, and we ended up going to our campus's French club events. We became best friends. But the thing was, the closer we got, the less I came to be like Blanche. I know it sounds weird, but she would tell me secrets, like how the thought of yellow cake turns her on, and what she would want said cake when she encountered it. I'll spare you the unpleasant details. She expressed these feelings with Asian cuisine as well, so things were really weird. Once we agreed to work on a group project, only for her to literally do nothing, she seemed oblivious as to why I was angry. But I digress. She began copying me in various ways, gestures, tone of voice, siding with my opinion on various topics when she didn't do so before. I ended up switching my major because I guess the upper level classes for my degree weren't in demand like the intro courses. I found out I could study abroad with this degree and applied for a scholarship, but the trip fell through due to low interest. Fortunately, I was allowed to use the money on another student abroad trip of my choice. Blanche suggested to me that I go on the same trip as her, and one of our mutual peers. I figured I may as well, since we were still good on terms at this point. One thing you must remember, Blanche went on the study abroad trip before. This is important to know later. In the weeks leading up to the trip, Blanche insisted we drive to the location with the mutual peer I referenced earlier. I asked her what she had packed on her last trip, and she would lie about various aspects. For instance, I asked if we needed to pack cookware, and she insisted we did not need to, but then would say she regretted not doing so last time. It was just a weird thing to lie about. The day we depart arrives, and it's the day before Mother's Day. I had not studied abroad before, so I gave my mom a hug and let her know how to contact me in case of an emergency. As I gave my mom a hug, I see Blanche glaring at my mother. I tell myself I imagined it and just pack my stuff into her older than dirt car. As we drive to pick up the mutual classmate, she tells me my mother threatened her when I was away. Now I know this is a lie, not just because my mother isn't a violent person, but I was with Blanche the whole time I was packing. If my mother made a threat, I would have heard it. I told her that she was a liar, and she just blew off my comment. So we pick up the mutual classmate, and he has a hard time hearing us up in the front seat. We try to keep him in the conversation, and he mentions he can't live without technology. I tease him and ask him, so what would happen if we just dumped you in the woods right here, where there's no Wi-Fi or signal? And he laughed and explained he'd be helpless. Blanche takes it one step further. Blanche asked how funny it would be if we just dumped him and we put him in the sex trade and traumatized him for life. Dead silence from us both, but she seemed oblivious. It was an awkward ride. We got to the hotel and I wake up hours before my classmates the next morning. As I mentioned earlier, it was Mother's Day, so I give my mom a call so she knows we made it all right. Halfway through the call, Blanche sends me a text demanding to know where I went. I hear her feet angrily pound against the ground as she approached, so I told my mom I'd call her back later and hang up. Time skipped to when we get to the campus. She immediately ditches me and the classmate to do her own thing, while we aimlessly tried to figure out where to go. We had a meeting before to our apartments, but since the classmate and I weren't familiar with the campus, we could not find the building. Minutes before the meeting, Blanche texts me and asked me where we went, and the two of us skated into the meeting with minutes to spare. We caught up with Blanche, and she asked where we went. I explained my phone plan. I was only afforded up to so many texts and couldn't reply. I asked why she ditched us and didn't tell us where we were going. She then lies and says she had neither of our phone numbers, even though she had texted me 10 times prior. At this meeting, we had to pick up 3 classes of our choice for the program that aligned with our interest. I was tired of Blanche at this point, so when I saw her copying my answers, I would change them. When I saw her erase and copy my choices again, I reselected my classes and flipped the paper over. I just needed space from her. The 3 of us go shopping, and Blanche insists we pool our money so we have more spending power. It seemed logical, and since I discovered she lied about having cookware supplied for us, I wanted to buy pots and pans. She tells me there's no need. one of our roommates would loan us hers and suggest we spend 1/3 of our funds on wine. We bought a few frozen meals and pasta and returned to the apartment. I cooked dinner and we have a ton of leftovers, which I pack up since no one said they wanted any. Blanche asks if she can have some of the leftovers, and I tell her if we still have some on Friday, they're all yours. Not only were my leftovers gone before Friday, but so was all my food that I purchased for myself. I had no more money to go shopping. Blanche then tells my roommates one evening that I had a variety of weapons and was liberal with how I used them. I was horrified and embarrassed. Not only was this a lie, but she seemed to think my displeasure was amusing. She then goes on to tell my roommates she studies psychology, and my mother would frequently consult her for advice on her cases. She then casually suggests that we cook meth in the kitchen. I was horrified, and so were my roommates. I try to laugh it off like a joke, but Blanche is dead serious. I scold her and say that I'm not interested. My mind was made up at this point. We needed a new apartment. At first, the university thinks my request is foolish, to say the least, but when I mention meth, they immediately agree to find a new apartment. So I go back to my apartment to start packing. Blanche got the notice she was reported for potential drug use, and she's told I'm leaving the apartment. She pushes me into my room and blames one of our roommates for reporting her, and says that this report is why I'm being kicked out of the apartment. I try to convince her our roommate is innocent, but Blanche wasn't about to hear it. So she convinces both of our roommates to go to the main office and demand answers. I keep packing and wash a few loads of dirty clothes. As I climb the stairs back up to the apartment, I run into Blanche and the roommates who are consoling her. The main office told her I reported her. I really wish they had not, because they triggered a monster. Blanche starts violently staring me down, like she's ready to fight. I play it cool when this happens. I realize she owes me the money because she won't be giving me a ride home. I take the money and switch apartments. I thought this was the end, but I was way off the mark. This wasn't even the trip. This wasn't even the tip of the iceberg. Each week, the university had mandatory meetings in which they would take us on field trips of sorts for cultural immersion. Blanche would always sit in the meetings where I could see her and would stare at me for the duration of these meetings, with my roommates babying her like she was a scorned saint. At the end of each meeting, everyone had to sign up for a trip that we discussed at the meeting. Blanche would stand immediately behind me in lines and sign up for the same trips I would. This is not a crime in and of itself, but one of the trips, she would either stand immediately behind me or in my line of vision, glaring at me through her sunglasses. On one trip, I discovered the town had public Wi-Fi. So as long as you were in town limits, you could access the internet for free. So I caught up with a couple of friends during lunch. A mutual friend of ours let me know Blanche had been sending everyone in our social circles messages about how I tried to physically attack her, and he sent me the screenshots of what she had sent him. Just then, I get a text from the witch herself, Blanche. I look up from my phone and see she is standing immediately behind me with a roommate. Instead of talking to me verbally, she gestures towards her phone, indicating I should text back. I just tell her this: look, I can't text because, like I told you, I have a limited number of texts I can send. I am not going to waste them. Furthermore, I don't feel comfortable talking to you, especially not here. If you want to talk, we can do it at the university." I think we are on the same page, but not 5 minutes later, the mutual friend who sent me the screenshots updates me. Blanche immediately texts him saying I violently yelled at her and threatened her. I figured it's best to just never be in the same place as her, to avoid these accusations. So that's what I do. At the weekly meetings, I wait for her to sign up for something, so I can pick up something else. I ignored her, but one day, she followed me into the ladies' room and tried to grab me by my arm to talk. I narrowly avoid her grasp, but she tried to follow me to class. I told the university about this and they let my home university in on everything. I just wanted to let them know she was just following me around and trying to get me to engage with her. My host university ended up barring her from future trips because of the drug accusations. I'd like to say this was the end of it, but she tried to get me fired for reporting to work. That's a story in and of itself, so I won't share it here. A week ago, my mom called me and told me to check my LinkedIn account. It was a weird request, but she told me Blanche was spying on her LinkedIn account. Sure enough, Blanche was lurking on my account. We both blocked her, so I hope that's the end of it. Blanche, let's never meet again.